What's up guys, and welcome to episode 12 of Banda Inku's Blood Rage painting series. Today we'll be painting the fire giant as voted for over on Patreon. To start things off, I gave him a base coat of a 3-to-1 mix of leather brown and black. After that, I applied a 2-to-1 mix of dark tone and wash base to all the skin, and then came back and dabbed up any spots where it pulled a little too much using a damp brush. After that wash had fully dried, I did a couple dry brushes to pop out those muscle details by first doing a dry brush of leather brown, followed by a 1-to-1 mix of leather brown and bone white, and finally, a bit of just bone white. After getting all those highlights popped out, I then used a smaller dry brush to apply some cooler tones into the shadows. The color used for this was a 2-to-1 mix of royal purple and black mixed with an equal amount of leather brown. I then applied Sanguine Base to the edges of those shadows to warm them up a bit, and then applied a light dry brush of bone white to re-establish some of those highlights that got covered up by the Sanguine Base. With the skin now done, I base coated the hair using leather brown, and then did a kind of wet brush technique where I rubbed the edge of the brush against the ridges of the hair using a 1-to-2 mix of leather brown and bone white to pick out the little strands, then came back and accentuated those edges using a smaller brush to make them pop just a little bit more. I then applied a wash of Army Painter Strong Tone. Then while that wash was drying, I base coated the tongue using Sanguine Base, followed by some Skorne Red and Khador Red Base on the edges to pop it out, and then a 2-to-1 mix of red tone and purple tone to apply a wash to all the mouth. Once both those washes were nice and dry, I came back with my 1-to-2 mix of leather brown and bone white and picked out the ridges of the hair once more, as well as the teeth. I then used Bonewhite to base coat the tusks, skulls, nails, and highlight the teeth. I then started working on all the gold bits by applying a base coat of Rhulic Gold to the headdress and hair ties, then clean up the rest of his bling using leather brown before applying Rhulic Gold to those as well. As I've mentioned before, there are various ways to paint gold, but one of my favorite ways and one of the easiest is to undercoat all the gold pieces in a medium to dark brown first, then apply the gold over top of that. Once all that gold was base coated, I of course used a wash of Smokey Ink to bring out all those details. I also apply this to all the skulls, teeth, and nails. Once that wash was fully dried, I then used Bonewhite to dry brush the skulls and the tusks to bring out some of the details, and then used a fine brush to highlight the ends of the fingernails, the teeth, and the tusks. I then created a non-metallic metal effect, but using true metallic paints by applying some highlights to the center areas of all that gold, first with some solid gold, followed by an equal mix of solid gold and radiant platinum applied to the center of those solid gold highlights, and then in certain places, a small amount of radiant platinum, particularly on some of the edges and corners. I then used straight Smokey Ink to blend onto the edges and middle areas of the gold to make a more extreme contrast and make that gold really pop. I also carefully dropped some Smokey Ink into some of the crevices that got hit with the highlights to make sure those little crevices were nice and defined. After all that gold was complete, I used a 1-to-1 mix of leather brown and bone white to base coat his wedgie cloth, then give it a wash of Smokey Ink, followed by a highlight with that same 1-to-1 mix of leather brown and bone white. After that, I applied some black lava texture paint to the entire base, dabbing blobs on certain parts to make higher areas and make some ravines, where later we'll paint some lava. After that, I thinned some Morrow White in the airbrush cup using flow improver and water, adding a little bit more flow improver than I normally do, since white tends to be a little bit more difficult to spray, and the extra flow improver just helps it to flow and spray a little bit smoother. I then sprayed that on the top 3/4 of the sword, and then stored the rest in a little potion jar and set it aside. Next, I applied Cygnus Yellow to the middle section of the sword. Next, I wet blended on some Khador Red Highlight onto the lower part of the sword, the bottom of the fire, and the middle part of the sword where the fire is going across it. I also blended onto the tip of the sword, but ignore that part for now. I came back and redid that part, so just leave the tip yellow for now. After that, I blended on some Khador Red Base onto the bottom of the blade, as well as a little bit in the center of that middle part of the sword, and the top half to 2/3 of the fire. I then blended on a 2-to-1 mix of Khador Red Base and black onto the bottom bit of the blade, as well as on the ends of the fire. You'll also notice that I applied this to the middle section of the sword, but just ignore that for now. I ended up coming back and fixing that part to be the original orange and a little bit of red, so just leave it as it is. Then after applying that darker red color, I came back with some Khador Red Base and blended that over top with the darker red to make the blend a little bit more smooth and a little brighter. Then to finish off the cooler parts of the fire and the sword, I blended on some Nuln Oil to the very tips of the flames and the bottom of the sword. After that, I used a fine detail brush to apply a bit of Reikland Fleshshade along the edge of the flat area of the sword to create some contrast between that and the blade. Then to create the very hottest parts of the sword, I grabbed that Morrow White from my little potion jar and put it back in my airbrush and sprayed it into the very middle of the yellow section and onto the very tip of the blade to create some nice hot spots. I also applied this with a brush to the inner designs of the sword, the raised edges of the blade, as well as the runes, his eyes, the eyes on the skull, and various recessed areas on the base. After that, I blended on some Cygnus Yellow into the areas of the design on the sword where the main part of the sword was orange, as well as on his eyes, in his runes, and in the very center of all the white areas on the base to start creating some nice hot lava. I then blended on some Khador Red Highlight in the sword design over the red section and applied it to the eyes on all the skulls, in parts of the runes, and on the outer edges of the lava sections on the base. I then applied some Khador Red Base to the very lowest section of the sword design, as well as to the upper edges of the lava and in the middle of the orange sections of the runes. I then finished off the sword by applying a little bit of Nuln Oil to the lower section of the sword design. Then to finish things off, I applied some Thamar Black to the very tips of all the lava to create the coolest solidified parts, as well as outline the trim of the base. And with that, the fire giant is now complete. Thank you all for joining. I hope you enjoyed seeing my painting process and learned some things along the way. As always, I love to hear what you guys think of this model in the comments below, and look forward to seeing you on the next one. In the meantime, be sure to head over and check out the Banda Inku Patreon, Facebook, and Instagram pages for extra Banda Inku goodness. Fire giant complete! Banda out!